Important housekeeping notices. First of all, can I remind you to turn off mobile phones, please? I have remembered to do my own a couple of minutes ago. We are not expecting a fire alarm. So if it does go off, it is the real thing. And please just follow staff who will escort you via the nearest exit downstairs and into the assembly point outside. My final point is that due to the restrictions on time and because of the question and answer format of the event itself, and also so as not to eat into our discussion and networking time downstairs, there won't be questions and answers at the end of the session. Just wanted to alert you to that. It is now my great pleasure to invite Professor Dame Nancy Rothwell, President and Vice Chancellor of the University, to welcome you.
Thank you, Chris, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the University of Manchester to this Philanthropy Day. We're here to celebrate those very many of you who have generously given to the university. In particular, of course, the highest levels of donors, for which we will have a ceremony, but actually everybody who has given, however little that may be, is extremely important. This very university was founded by philanthropists. Indeed, it was started by the wealthy of Manchester, many of whom made their money from the Industrial Revolution. John Owens, Joseph Whitworth, Christie, Bayer, Langworthy, and many others. And therefore, none of us would be here today without that extreme generosity. And so we felt it was time that we should celebrate. And the celebration for this part, you'll be hearing a conversation with one of our better-known staff, Professor Brian Cox. I hope that you've had a chance to look at some of the exhibits downstairs, and if you haven't, then please do go down afterwards, where you can see a range of projects that are benefiting and have benefited from generous donations. The Humanitarian Conflict Response Institute, the Manchester Cancer Research Centre, the Brooks World Poverty Institute, Equity and Merit Scholarships, Manchester Access Programme, our buildings, our studentships. Your donations change lives, and that's incredibly important. Some of you will be aware that the university has 3 goals, which is research, to discover new knowledge and apply it to benefit wherever we can, to educate graduates who we believe, many of which will change the world, and also to make a difference to society. And through your donations, we can really make a difference. Some of you may have been on the tours around the Whitworth Art Gallery and seen the spectacular new extension, the Manchester Museum, the National Graphene Institute, the Alan Gilbert Learning Commons, and the library. So I hope those of you who haven't had a chance to do those tours will come back again. Let me just finally reiterate that this is an important day for us to say a big, big thank you to all of you and to the difference you make. Giving at all levels is going to change this university. It was the founding of the university, and it will be the future of the university. So now I'd like to invite Brian and the 3 students, Nick, Rebecca and Bilal, to come and have a conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Today is all about the impact of giving and philanthropy across campus. As in everything connected to the university, the students are at the heart of everything that we do. So we thought today, rather than just talk about our students in the third person, we would actually put them centre stage for this important event. And that's students, whether they're prospective students considering whether to come to university at all, or Manchester in particular, students undertaking undergraduate programmes, so that in their first taste of higher education, or indeed those undertaking PhD study, new research frontiers for the benefit of the general wider world. So our 3 students today represent each of those cohorts of students, if you like. Brian, this is going to be a little bit like question time in 1 or 2 respects. In one respect, it's going to be similar in that you don't know the questions that you are going to be asked. You may have had the odd broad guess, but there may be some surprises along the way. Where it is a little bit different to question time is that you are perfectly allowed to ask reasonable questions back of your interviewers. We do hope to get into a bit of a discussion in one or two parts. So, in different ways, all three of our students either benefit directly from gift support or may do in the future, as you shall hear. Brian, I'm not going to ask you to introduce yourself because I've got an inkling that the audience may have an idea of who you are, and we will be hearing more about your background and your views, of course, over the next hour or so. But I would like to invite each of our students to introduce themselves to the audience, and I wonder, Becky, whether you might start us off.
Yep. Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca Hardman. I'm a third year English literature student, and I completed the Manchester Access programme in 2011. As a result of this, I was awarded the Carpidas Scholarship.
And Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm doing a PhD in particle physics, and I've got a scholarship from George Riggs to do that.
Fantastic. And Bilal.
Hi, I'm Bilal. I'm from Oldham Sixth Form College, and I've received a offer thanks to in Manchester. I received an offer in mechanical engineering thanks to the Manchester Access Programme, and I shall also receive a scholarship, a donor-funded scholarship, again thanks to MAP.
Great. So we'll all be keeping our fingers crossed for your final grades because we hope to see you back next year, Bilal. Bilal, maybe you'd like to kick us off with the first question to Brian.
Was becoming a physicist a childhood dream of yours, or did you see yourself pursuing a different career?
No, it was a childhood dream, is the answer. In particular, I'd been interested in astronomy since as far back as I can remember. I always remember. Actually, I'll tell you a secret. Actually, when I went to school at 11, when I went to senior school, you suddenly do loads of different subjects. And French was a thing that I didn't get along with. And I told the French teacher when I was 11 that there was no point in a physicist learning French. And therefore, I had no interest at all. And subsequently, I ended up working in Geneva, where I couldn't communicate with the people who served the food in the canteen who speak French. So that's what I always wanted to do. Actually, though, as many of you may know, at the age of 18, I took a year off to be a musician. I'd been in a band, and the band got a record deal, and that turned into 5 years off. So I came back to do physics at Manchester when I was 23. So I had quite a big gap, actually. But in those days, I was told not to give too long answers to short questions, but I'll just say one thing, that in those days, I feel it was a lot easier to do that because, of course, I got a grant then. I was the first person in my family to go to university, but I had a grant, and of course there were no tuition fees, so there was no essentially graduate tax when you finished. So I think it was easier in those days for me to just take a bit of time, take 5 years off and then come back to university again.
Great. So leaping forward, Becky.
Yep. What has been the most memorable moment of your scientific career so far?
It's personally the biggest achievement I felt was getting my PhD. I think it's an absolutely transformative moment because that 3 years or 4 years or however long it takes you it's enjoyable. You learn. In my case, you learn how to be a scientist. You really learn when you're doing research and you're looking at data and nobody knows the answer. So you learn how to be intellectually honest and rigorous. But then the point where you write that up, writing the thesis, is terrifically difficult, I think. It's a very high pressure and intense thing to do. And then to have to defend it against an intellectual assault, which is what it's designed to be. That's I've been a PhD examiner, both internally and externally, actually, for universities. And that's the point. You're supposed to be put through the ringer. That's when you change as a person, I think, in that process of writing up that research, of justifying it to yourself, of being intellectually rigorous, and then finding out that the level of, I was going to say intellectual aggression, but that sounds like a negative thing. It's very positive to have your peers and people in your field drill down to make sure that, and what they're really doing, they're not only making sure that you understand what you've done, but they're trying to make sure that what you did stands up because nobody knows the answer. You know, in particle physics, in my terms, it was a very esoteric piece of work in a sense on how photons collide with protons. And so it's a gamma photon-proton collisions. It's a, you know, but the point was that I discovered something that nobody had ever discovered before. And therefore, you need to be absolutely confident in yourself that you can defend it. It might be wrong, ultimately. It might turn out that for reasons you don't know, for future data may come in and show that you weren't right. But that's the joy of discovery in both the arts and science, I think. So I'd say that. And then I'll finish the answer there, but when I get a chance a bit later on, I'll also talk about, I think the most exciting discovery in my scientific career is the Higgs particle, which I didn't have a great hand in. I had a hand in the development of that experiment, the Atlas experiment, but not in the analysis that found the Higgs. But I'll stop there, but I will talk about that before the end of it, because I can. So I'll tell you about the Higgs. But, fantastic. So, yeah.
Bilal, back
PhD.
to you.
How did you find university life as a student?
How did I find university life here at Manchester? I found it probably the most intellectually stimulating period of my life in terms of the gradient that I went on. I really felt that in the way that if you do sort of any kind of fitness training or something, then often you get to a point where suddenly you feel a big surge forward and you think, I can run faster, or I can do whatever. I'm stronger than I was before. And actually coming to Manchester as an undergraduate, I felt there was this almost awakening in intellectual capability, which comes from practice. Because I think the act of coming to challenging lectures, hour after hour, week after week, you know, the level, the difference between A-level and degree level, I think it's large and it's challenging, but it's terrifically stimulating, I think. I mean, that's maybe where I bounce that back. So you haven't experienced that yet. You're going to do that when you get your A-levels and come here. But I could ask you both, perhaps. Did you find that? I really found that suddenly I was like almost had intellectual superpowers relative to what I'd had before because of that.
Well, obviously, because I do English literature, it's quite a different field, but I'd never studied medieval literature before coming to the University of Manchester, and that is a really big part of studying English literature here, which is fabulous because it's something that I'm intensely passionate about now. And last year I actually won the Thomas Maguire Prize for my medieval grades, which is fabulous because it's something that I'd never done and never had the opportunity to do. So I do think that Manchester is a really great institution because it kind of pushes the boundaries and kind of stretches your imagination further. So it is a great leap, but I think it's probably one of the most exciting leaps that you'll ever take in your life, and I feel quite happy that I've made that jump from A-level.
Nick?
Yeah. I mean, there's a big lifestyle change in coming to university. At school level, you're always there's someone to chase you up if you don't do all the work. There's someone to tell you off and make sure you buckle down later. At university, if you don't want to work, if you just want to doss off, you can do, and you'll fail your course. And it's good to learn not to do that, because that's what happens in the real world. If you're lazy, you'll fail.
Yeah.
And plus, when you come to Manchester, you get fantastic general relativity lecturers. Sorry, George, I'm not sure he's doing it now. I don't think he's very good. It's Brian. Brian's the new lecturer for this.
I'm first year, I teach the first years.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting what you said there, because did you feel that, what I felt was it's not only the subject that you're in, but I felt Manchester was a place where you were exposed to ideas because of the people you know, where do you live? At Owens Park? Did you?
I actually commute into university, so I'm from North Manchester.
Yeah, but that social mix of meeting students from all over the world, actually, not only all backgrounds, but all over the world, doing all sorts of different subjects. I found that extremely stimulating. It's one of the reasons, actually, I think that irrespective of any economic arguments for universities, of which there are many, which we might get onto, the idea that you can, at the age of 18, you can move out of your hometown in that sense and be exposed to ideas that you would have never otherwise have been exposed to is in itself terrifically valuable for society, I think. And I think that, talking about philanthropy as we are to some extent, the idea that donation, I myself raise money for the Manchester Access Programme, and one of the reasons is that I think that if you can have one person that you can take, just one, that wouldn't have been exposed to this environment and expose them to it, the level of payback on your investment, both personal for that individual, but also to society, is immense. I mean, I could ask you just briefly, because you both, well, you're hoping to be on the Manchester programme and you've benefited from it.
Yeah.
Would you have gone? The answer may be yes, you would. But would you have come to university had it not been for the Manchester programme?
Well, actually, I want to be a primary school teacher, so I was considering just going straight into doing a primary school degree. But then I decided, through coming to the Manchester Access programme, that'd be nice to actually expand my field of knowledge in English literature, and actually through expanding my knowledge of that, become a better teacher in turn, because obviously I've seen more and read more, and it makes you more cultured as an individual. I mean, the Manchester Access programme was absolutely fabulous, and it really did benefit me as a student. We did an academic assignment, and we did a presentation as part of a group, so obviously I now can sit here in front of all you lovely people and talk. So, I mean, it teaches you many skills that will benefit you in the future. And it is absolutely incredible that many people choose to donate to the Manchester Access programme. It's growing and it's expanding because it works. And I think working class people and people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds do want that opportunity, and it's great that it does get so much support.
So as well, you see that, talking about this snowball effect of a relatively small philanthropic investment. The fact that every year you're going to have 30 children coming through that you're going to impart bits of that knowledge from that you picked up here. It's an exponential impact. Actually, isn't it?
Bilal, how are you finding the Access programme, and has it made a difference?
Yeah, it's actually made quite a difference. I initially wanted to do physics at university, but because of the Access programme, I met quite a few people that actually did engineering instead.
What? Obviously,
we told you there was some surprises coming, Brian.
That's actually the reason why I changed to engineering instead.
I should say, I just mentioned in passing, I went the other way. Actually, so I wanted to do physics. At 18, I applied to do electronic engineering, mainly because of careers advice from school, which would have been fun. And then when I came back after my little gap, I went back to physics again. But would you have considered university without the Access programme, or would you think you would have gone for it?
I would have still considered university, yes. But I know quite a few of my friends wouldn't have if it wasn't for the Access programme.
Yeah, because it allows you to, not only is it financially supportive, I suppose it allows you to come into the university and see what the university has to offer.
Brian, you mentioned the social side and how important that was. You didn't give any examples of any memorable moments from your own social life at university. Anything that sticks in the mind that we might, any sneak preview of your future memoirs?
I rather boringly, I suppose, for the answer. I don't know what you want me to say. I used to play on the physics football team, which was a great fun. So that was one of my highlights, actually. I really used to enjoy physics football. Yeah. Couldn't do it now.
Thanks.
If you're interested, it's the bubble chamber thing at the weekend.
The Bubble Chamber Cup, yeah. We should say that, so bubble chambers, we have a tradition in physics. Many of the physics universities, the big physics departments in the big universities, Birmingham, UCL, who else is there? Imperial, Liverpool. We have the thing called the Bubble Chamber Cup. Bubble chambers were the old ways of detecting particles back in the 1950s and through to the 60s, I think. So they're essentially, you get a charged particle through some saturated vapor. This is called the cloud chamber. But they're also analog detectors, essentially, where you used to detect old particles. And there was a big bubble chamber, as it's called, which was built by many of these collaborating universities. And to this day, so it's 50 years now, is it? It's something like 50 years that every year we have the Bubble Chamber Football Cup. Nothing to do with anything, but
it's a good opportunity to meet other physicists and get very, very drunk with them over football.
No.
So, Becky, you've got a sort of overview question about Manchester.
Yeah, so what does the University of Manchester mean to you, and how has it shaped you as an individual?
Oh, I mean, I've been here now for probably almost half my life, actually. Really, I mean, I started in, 22 years ago, I think it was now. So, so it's been a huge part of my life. I genuinely didn't want to leave from the moment I got here. As I said, that undergraduate experience was terrific for me. then my PhD, which I did here and partly in Hamburg at an accelerator in particle physics. As you'll know, it's quite good for travel, particle physics. Most particle physicists now are good skiers as a result of... Do you ski? Yeah, so... and then as my first postdoc position, I got, obviously I've been here ever since, and now as a lecturer and then a professor. So I won't leave. I'll leave here when I am forcibly retired and the long road to becoming emeritus. Yeah, about half my life has been here. Yeah, it's a wonderful place to be.
Nick?
Okay, do you think higher education has a role to play in reducing social inequality?
Yes. I mean, to me, it's you can wheel out figures. So the figures are relatively obvious. I think there's a big OECD study recently that showed that on average, an individual who goes through higher education, tertiary education, earns about £200,000 more over their lifetime than a comparable person who doesn't. They also pay about £100,000 extra into the tax system above the cost of the higher education. So for both the taxpayer and the individual, it's a terrifically good investment. But also, I think socially, I wrote an article just before the last election, actually, in the Times, kind of an op-ed in the Times, which was called My Utopia. And my utopian vision was for a country where everybody had been through higher education, essentially. Because I think that the number one reason that coming to a university like this is valuable is that you're exposed to ideas. You're taught critical thinking. You understand that if you had dogmatic views or you had rather a myopic view of the world, then the job of institutions like this is to open your mind, I think. As well, rather than or as well as producing the kind of what I call the cannon fodder for the knowledge economy. It's kind of obvious that if I want to throw statistics out, we need 1 million more people qualified in STEM, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics, in the economy by 2020. 1 million more, and that's from apprenticeships all the way through to PhD level engineers and scientists and mathematicians. We're not going to get that, so that's the demand from industry. So economically you need it. But I think that more than that, it's just the fact that just having the opportunity to come and have your mind broadened and be exposed to ideas is probably definitely more valuable, I think. So yes, absolutely. And as I said, it obviously reduces economic inequality. The figures tell you that. But it's also true, of course, that when you go to university, it's more likely your children will go to university and your grandchildren. That's one of the things the Manchester Access Programme is trying to deal with, because I was the first person to go to university in my family.
Not my case, my brother came.
Your brother did. You're the first generation to do so.
Yeah, first generation. My parents didn't go to university.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that, and yourself, would you?
Yeah, I'm the first person in my family to go to university.
Yes. So that's self-evident, I think.
Becky,
Yeah.
a linked question.
Do you think it's important for universities like Manchester to raise aspirations and achievement in socially disadvantaged communities?
Yes, again, for the same reasons. I should say that what's interesting, we say aspirations. I mean, we both come from Oldham, right? And I was back in Oldham recently, actually. And I find, I'm not sure if there is a lack of aspiration. I think if there's anything, there's a lack of sense of possibility. So I've met very few students at schools, actually. I should say I'm also a patron of a school in Tower Hamlets in London, which is in some ways similar in terms of challenges to the challenges you see in Oldham. And there's no lack of ambition there, I find. Well, it's a lack of just understanding the pathway, I suppose, to university, and also economic benefits, whether they're real or perceived. If we had someone from the government here, they'd argue that tuition fees are paid after you start working. But putting the politics aside, I think that there's in my experiences, it's a lack of understanding that university could possibly be for you, and then having the economic barrier, even if it's perceived, of finding it difficult and worried about running up the debts. Did you find that amongst your friends? Did you see a lack of aspiration or a lack of just a worry about the actual size of the commitment?
Yeah, it was more about the worry and the debt they had to pay back after, because they didn't know much about how do you pay back the student loans, and that you pay back after you earn a certain amount and things like that.
Yeah.
Also, it was like the lack of course awareness. They had no idea how many courses the university would like offer them. So when they were in school, they would mention about they had no idea what to do. But then if they looked at the university courses, they would probably find one that would suit them well.
Yeah.
I think people as well kind of suffered from a lack of confidence, because obviously you are going up against a lot of people who've been to private schools, especially in places like Manchester. And it is just one of those things, and that's what the Manchester Access Programme helped many people with, just building that confidence to realise actually you are good enough to come to university, and there are plenty of people out there who are willing to support you on that journey. So I think it is great that we do that.
One of the things that's been very heartening for the university is that we haven't seen a reduction in the number of applications from students from lower income background despite the new fee. But in this very theatre, we run a big session every year linked to the MAP programme where the students and their parents come, and we talk to them about the funding of higher education and what will the implications will be for their children and for them. And at the beginning, we ask how many people are really worried about the funding and financing of university, and just about every hand goes up. We then talk them through it for about 45 minutes and explain how the repayment of the loan will happen and the level of scholarships that will be available, etc. And by the end, just about, I don't think they're just being polite, but hardly any hands go up at all. But there was a big issue at the time the new fee regime came in, certainly, about the public understanding of what it actually meant in practice. But so far, it seems to be holding up reasonably well.
I was going to ask you actually, because the George Riggs Scholarship, so I met George in, it was at a university event in Washington, D.C., I think, it was many years ago now, and spoke to him about this. And his reason, one of his reasons, I think, you're not here, are you, George? I should say. No,
He's represented by Nick. He's represented by Nick.
Yeah, well, one of his reasons was that we talked a lot about what I think is the possibility to generate new knowledge in research groups like particle physics was outstripping the supply of PhD students. And so I felt it was a very strong barrier. So perhaps talking about generation of new knowledge, you just might say a few words on. I know you're working on 3D silicon, so do you want to say a little bit about that and the potential applications, or maybe or just your work?
So I work with a type of detector called a silicon detector. Basically, they let you track the positions of charged particles to really, really high levels. So we're talking micrometer levels of precision. In my case, that's mostly used for particle detectors for the ATLAS experiment at the LHC, if you know what that is, and other particle experiments as well. But I'm also doing some work with radiotherapy beams. So we're not really sure how many particles are in a radiotherapy beam, how fast they're going. We have rough ideas, but not very precise estimates. So we want to use the technology that's been developed for particle accelerators and transpose it into medical applications here in Manchester, and hopefully make these radiotherapy services slightly better for everyday use.
So this is things like proton beam therapy?
Mostly electron stuff at the moment, so beta radiation at the moment. But eventually we'd like to use it for, proton therapy.
I should say that just a bit of background, there's a lot of work been done together with the Cockcroft Accelerator Institute at Daresbury, which is Lancaster, Liverpool and Manchester, together with Daresbury Lab, on particle accelerator technology, but also on how you can use particle beams, say in medical applications. One that I was particularly interested in was, which I asked, is proton beam therapy, which is a very precise way of targeting tumours, brain tumours, for example, where you can just target that dose of energy, as it were, very, very precisely, which is a very interesting technology, isn't it? Which has matured in my working life, actually.
Yeah, I don't think there's any evidence to say it's currently more effective than best practice, but certainly in theory you can massively reduce the side effects of radiotherapy, so massively reduce the amount of healthy tissue you're killing, and also kill a lot more of this horrible cancerous stuff.
Yes.
if it ever works.
Yeah, well, it's a cutting-edge research, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Nick, Brian asked you a question. You can ask one back, I think, about the role of PhD students.
Oh, yes. So how important do you think PhD students are to specifically applied physics research?
Yeah, I mean, you know, but I can answer for you.
Maybe
They're absolutely vital. They're fought over. So you know, again, I talk about particle physics because that's what I do. And I've had about, how many have I had? 7 or 8 PhD students in my time. I haven't got one at the moment, actually. The reason for that is obviously I've been distracted somewhat by this television nonsense. But actually that tells you something, because I could have. I felt it was sort of improper because to try and get one, and I haven't had a PhD student now for about 3 or 4 years, because I've been partly distracted. And the reason is they're such a valuable resource, and there aren't enough. So every academic, every research active academic would benefit immensely from having PhD students and postdocs working with them. The PhD students in particle physics are the people who spend their time at the experiments. Well, it depends what you're doing. I mean, you're developing detector technology, aren't you, which we do in Manchester as well as at CERN. But if you're doing data analysis at CERN, then you need to be there every day. You need to be writing the computer code. You need to be embedded in that atmosphere. Otherwise, you can't do the research. So you're the bridge, really, in a sense, between the data and the academic and the postdocs. And so the more, I think they're one of the most cost-effective ways of increasing the research output of a group, because the more PhD students you have, bluntly, the more papers you produce, because they're the kind of the people at the cutting edge, if you like, at the coalface. So I think, you know, we spend a lot of, well, we don't spend enough, but we spend a large amount of money in the UK supporting research, and I think one of the best ways to lever that, to really ratchet it up, is to get more PhD students in. And then, of course, then you talk about the fact that the benefit to the individual is enormous. I mean, as I said, I really felt I learned to be a scientist at the end of my PhD, when you start defending real data and real research.
And what are the obstacles for more PhD students? I mean, obviously funding is part of the picture, but is there...
No, I think it's funding. I think it's places, because certainly my experience as an undergraduate at Manchester was the competition for the PhD places that were available across all research groups, whether it be astronomy or particle physics or materials science or medical physics, whatever it is. The competition was immense. And we could have filled those places probably 3 or 4 times over with people from internally on the physics course. And there are about, what are there now, 270 a year, is it, I think, in physics now. I should know, because I teach them in this lecture theatre. I teach them first year, but I can't count them up. I think it's purely the number of places that are available.
Right. We wanted in the heart of this to give you a chance to expand a bit on a couple of areas, Brian. And Bilal's got a question that I think you might want to expand and take your time over. Bilal.
Yeah, which part of physics intrigues you the most, and the reasons behind it?
I think there are 2 areas that I think are fascinating at the moment. One, because I mentioned it earlier, the Higgs particle, but let me expand it a little bit into particle physics and cosmology and the interface between those areas. So the Higgs particle, essentially the theory, which was developed in the 1960s for mathematical reasons, basically, was that as the universe expanded and cooled, let's say around 1/1000th of a second after the Big Bang or so, then empty space ceased to be empty. In more technical language, the lowest energy state of the vacuum of empty space is not to be empty, but to be filled with something. And that thing is called the Higgs field, or if you like, Higgs particles. And so when the golden rule in physics is that everything likes to be in the lowest energy state it can be. So if you want to describe how a ball ends up at the bottom of a valley, you would say it has less energy at the bottom of the valley than it does at the top. So it'll roll down to the bottom. In the same way, the Higgs field was postulated to have behaved in this way. So as the universe cooled down, something happened. It went through what's called a phase transition. It's like water vapor turning into ice on a cold window. The universe went through one of these transitions. The empty space becomes full of the Higgs field or Higgs particles. And then other particles interact with that stuff that sits in empty space, and in that interaction they acquire mass. So the answer to the question at the most fundamental level, why do you have mass? So let's say why do the electrons in your atoms, why are they massive? The answer is because they're interacting with the Higgs field, which appeared at some point after the Big Bang. That turns out to be correct. We discovered the Higgs particles at the Large Hadron Collider. We don't know precisely how that mechanism worked. That's why the LHC switches on again this week, I think, if all goes well, or next week, because we need to investigate this thing we've discovered. But broadly speaking, that outline that I gave you is right now, we know. So that's a terrific shift in our understanding. We're talking about the structure of empty space itself. But there are other things that tell us that that's undoubtedly not the end of the story. One is that we know that about 95% of the universe, of the energy in the universe, is in a form that is not the particles out of which we are made, and not the Higgs particles. It's something else. And we call these something else's dark matter and dark energy. Dark energy is something that's causing the universe to accelerate in its expansion at the moment, which is a recent discovery made in the 1990s. The nature of that is unknown. It also turns out that there's 5 times as much matter in the form of dark matter as there is in the form of the matter out of which we are made, and the stars and planets and galaxies that we can see are made. And we don't know what that is either, although it's possible that we can detect new particles at the LHC, which will explain that. So there's an interesting mix now, a sort of a challenge in our understanding of fundamental physics, which is that we have 95% of the universe that looks like it's there, but in some form that we don't understand. We have this thing called the Higgs particle, which looks a bit like perhaps some of the things that might be causing the universe to accelerate, and other speculative stuff. We also have theories about what happened before the Big Bang, so-called inflationary cosmology, which again the data points in the direction that something happened before the Big Bang, and in stopping caused the Big Bang to happen. What's that? So we're at an interesting point where the data is telling us that our theories are inadequate to explain the large-scale structure of the universe. And that's brilliant. And very briefly, the other thing is that I think we're on the verge of finding life on Mars.
The science is important.
I'll just say very quickly. I think with life on Mars, the question of life on some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, even life on perhaps even more speculatively on other bodies out there in the solar system, that's become very scientifically fashionable again. And the reason is because of discoveries we've made. We're fairly sure now there's water below the surface of Mars. We know there are oceans below the surface of several of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, actually. So there are new missions. There's a big European mission, which is UK-led, or certainly UK have a big part in, called ExoMars, which is going to go to Mars. So it's partly orbiters, partly landers, partly a rover. It's going to go and search explicitly for life on Mars for the first time since the 1970s, when we landed, some NASA missions landed there. And the reason we're spending the money with the European Space Agency and the Russians on that is because we think that it might be successful. So I think that if you want the big changes that might happen in the next few years, there's the cosmology and particle physics are merging together, and there are big questions there waiting to be answered, for which we need PhD students, of course. And then there's also this question of are we alone in the universe? Big, grand question that's been asked for many centuries, which we now have a good chance of answering no, we're not. We may not even be alone in the solar system.
And are you a betting man? And if so, would you put your money on the answer being no?
I'd put money on, if I was betting, I'd put money on finding that life existed or still exists subsurface on Mars. I would say within the next 10 years, if ExoMars does its job, I'd put money on it finding evidence for that. And now the big question is whether it's the same as the life on Earth. Because we know that material is transferred between Mars and Earth and vice versa. So it could be that the origin of life on Earth was actually on Mars. We know that Mars had oceans way back in its past. So it could be the genesis of this kind of life was on Mars and it got transferred, or vice versa. Or it could be the biochemistry is different, in which case we would say there were two origins for life in the solar system. And the same could be true on Jupiter's moon Europa. There's a moon called Enceladus around Saturn, which has jets of water spraying out from the surface. Again, very easily accessible. Could there be microbes in those jets? Many scientists think so. So it's an exciting time.
Absolutely. Where do our student panel sit on extraterrestrial life?
Well, there's almost certainly some intelligent life out there somewhere in the cosmos, possibly not in the Milky Way, but certainly out there somewhere. And as you say, if there's liquid water, there's always a chance stuff can be living in it. I don't think there's anything alive on Mars at the moment. I'd be surprised if there was in the past.
Yeah. But European space. It's a big mission, ExoMars. So there's a good chance. There's a chance, otherwise you wouldn't send it.
Undoubtedly, yeah. But it would require life to. If it's not terrestrial life that's been blown off to Mars, I don't think it's likely that something would have evolved on Mars in the first place or been created. And we can answer the whatever Francis Drake equation.
The Drake equation.
Yeah. Francis Drake. Wrong person. Drake equation. Yeah.
Drake equation, I just said very briefly, is a framework for addressing for answering the question: how many intelligent civilizations might there be in the Milky Way galaxy now? And it was first proposed in the 60s by Frank Drake. So you've got probabilities in there. What's the probability of a planet that could support life, supporting life? So that's where we were talking about with Mars. It certainly could have supported life. There was definitely water on it in the past. There's probably still water below the surface today. So it had the things we think you need. So what's the probability of life spontaneously emerging in somewhere where you could have it? Then there's the question of, does that life become complex? Does it become multicellular? Does photosynthesis evolve, which is to get oxygen into the atmosphere? Does an intelligent species evolve? And if so, does it develop technology and civilizations? So there are all these probabilities. And back in the 60s, Frank Drake and Carl Sagan and others came up with a number of order, I think there were a number of order 10,000 by just looking at the probabilities. So they very broad guesses in a way. But they said, we think there may be somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. By the way, we now know that there are of order 20 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy, by which we mean rocky planets at the right distance from a star to permit liquid water to be on the surface. So you've got 20 billion potential homes for life. If you just count the planets, that 1 in 10 stars, we think, could have an Earth-like planet around it. So the odds, you might think, are large. But a biologist will tell you that it took 3.8 billion years for simple life on Earth to get to this stage where we can have a conversation, right? Why? Is that, do you need 3.8 billion years? That we don't know the answer, we've only got one example.
Remind us of the dates of that Mars mission, when it's planned.
The first launch of ExoMars, the ExoMars program is 2016, I think. So that would be, there you have areas where the University of Manchester, we're not involved in building anything for ExoMars as far as I know, but that's a question of choice and funding applications, etc. So we...
And that will be an international collaboration. You mentioned CERN earlier on. You've been very closely associated with that, Brian. I wonder whether you could just tell us a bit about the nature of that international collaboration and Manchester's role in it, linking back to the Higgs boson.
Yeah. Manchester's an old, famous particle physics group. Obviously, Rutherford discovered the atomic nucleus here. You could argue, therefore, it's the first particle physics group, in a sense. Cambridge would have an argument. They always do.
Let's be clear. When we said we were putting the blue plaque up for Rutherford splitting the atom here...
Yeah, well, Thomson discovered the electron, I suppose, in 1897, so you could argue...
And Cambridge allowed us to carry on.
So Manchester's always had a long history of building particle physics detectors, which is what you're carrying on, as well as using the data. And we built part of the Atlas experiment. We built the part of the silicon trackers. Which is again what you work on, new forms of silicon detector. So we built part of one of the two big multi-purpose experiments at CERN. We have a responsibility to operate it and to maintain it. And we also look at the upgrade programs and how we can do that. So we've always had a big hardware responsibility here in Manchester, way back since the start of particle physics. So we participated in virtually everything, I think. Certainly talking about particle accelerators, we've pretty much been on all of them since the 60s, the 50s, when such things existed. And before that, as I said, to Rutherford. So, yeah.
And it's a major international collaboration. How many countries?
Oh, there's 80 odd countries at CERN. Yeah. CERN, 10,000 physicists. Set up in the history is interesting. It was set up in 1956, was it, or 55? I can't quite remember. Just after the Second World War, as part of the European reconstruction effort to bring countries together in the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And the reason it managed to build the Large Hadron Collider, where the Americans failed, they tried to build a similar collider back in the 1990s, and they didn't do it. They built about half of it, and the funding collapsed. Congress pulled the plug, etc. The reason CERN can do it is because it's a group of countries that the institution itself is protected by international treaty. The cost to each individual member state is low because there are so many member states. And therefore you can build big projects like that. And it's a triumph, really. I mean, it's the most complicated machine ever built by most measures. And yet it's delivered beyond design specification. And by definition on budget, because you can't have any more money. What happens at CERN is if it overruns, it gets built later. Yeah. So nobody gives more money to CERN. It has a fixed budget, which, by the way, is less than the University of Manchester's budget. So it's when you look at that thing...
And we are not profligate, just to be...
No. I wondered that was the right thing to say. Look what they did. They built a Large Hadron Collider. Of course, we educate many, many thousands of students. But it's about the budget of a medium-sized European university, paid for by... the 20 member states of CERN mainly, but also contributions from 60 odd other countries around the world.
Yeah, that links, you've mentioned budgets and funding. Nick, I think that links to a question you want to ask about higher education funding.
Yes, apparently.
You have strong views on this, Brian.
So do you think the UK invests a sensible amount in higher education? How do you define sensible?
The answer is it's objectively no. I actually... So I thought I'd ask this question. I only wrote one set of figures down, which I put in my pocket, because I think accuracy is necessary. So I didn't know I was going to get asked this question, but I thought I'd probably get asked it. So just to tell you, the OECD produced many reports on this, on higher education spend. And it's interesting that, so the UK, this is before fees. We don't have figures for after the fees, which means the public contribution, if you discount the fees, is now lower than this. But we spent, in 2011, just before the fees came in, we spent 1.2% of GDP on higher education. The OECD average is 1.6%. If you look at so we're below that. But if you look at our competitors, Canada spent 2.8% of GDP on higher education. The United States, 2.7%. South Korea, 2.6%. So you see that we spend less than half the amount on higher education than our competitors, than our high-tech competitors. We also spend significantly less per student. This is the thing that I found most shocking when I looked it up. So we spend, this is in dollars, about $14,000 per student per year on higher education. In the US, it's $26,000. So you ask the question, well, what does that, what's remarkable about the UK higher education sector is that doesn't impact the quality of education as far as we can tell. If you look at and that's not anecdotal, if you look at the research figures, which I know by heart, the UK produces just under or around 15% of the highest cited scientific papers in the world, right? With 3% of the investment, I think 1% of the population. So we punch way above our weight. We're arguably, we're second only to the United States, and actually better than the United States in terms of efficiency. So that tells you that every pound spent on higher education is tremendously effectively used. So I think those figures speak for themselves. We're one more figure. The government has a measure called knowledge-intensive services and industry, So you can say, what's the percentage of GDP contributed by knowledge-intensive services and industry, which rest on the higher education sector? It's heading towards 50%. Just below 50% of the economy as a whole rests on the higher education sector by that measure. And yet we invest less than half the amount of our competitors. So that tells you something. Now, we're here because we're engaged in philanthropy. So there are two things you can do about that. One is that you find that the philanthropic contribution is significantly lower than the United States, and part of that percentage is coming from I suppose there's more of a culture of philanthropy in the States and big donations in the States. But also, of course, there's the political aspect that we don't take our future seriously enough. It's there in the figures. It's not an opinion. You can read it off. Compared to countries like Canada and Germany and South Korea and the United States, we do not invest as much in young people and in their future. And so there are two elements, I feel. One is to do something about it personally, which we all do, and I do also, which is to just invest our own money in higher education students. But secondly, of course, there's the political aspect. It's how do we make it more attractive to politicians to invest more in young people in the future?
If you were in charge for the UK government, let's say, making the decisions between what we might call discovery science and applied science, what would be your take on that and the importance of the two?
I think it's, I don't like the distinction, actually. I mean, you'll see the Graphene Centre, you may have seen it if some of you went to visit it, which is a beautiful example of what you might now call applied science, where you've got industry and academics working together in this field, which is a potentially multi-trillion-dollar field, right? I mean, graphene is one of the great possibilities for improvements in electronics and strength of materials and aircraft design, anything you can list. Graphene is potentially quite astonishing. The potential is astonishing. But, of course, that only exists, that centre, but the world market for graphene exists because of two Manchester academics who were curious about nature. And Andrei Geim and Kostya Novoselov, always, the two Nobel Prize winners for graphene, emphasised absolutely why did they come to Manchester? They came to Manchester because it offered them freedom to play around, and that's where how great discoveries are made. So the new knowledge becomes applied, right? And also by doing work in applied physics, as you said, you could be classified as a PhD student working in applied physics, right? You're looking at 3D silicon detectors, which are radiation-hard, high-resolution silicon detectors, which, as you said, can be deployed in medical physics or particle physics, or indeed there are military applications for that stuff, all sorts of stuff. But actually, why do we do it? Because we're curious about the way that the universe works. That's why we're developing 3D silicon at Manchester. We're not developing it necessarily because it's got any particular application. So I think you just invest in knowledge, actually. And we're talking about science a lot. I know you're an English graduate. There's knowledge, by the way, and those research figures that I give are the arts funding as well, the research into literature and history and philosophy and theology and whatever you want to name. The whole thing is it should be multidisciplinary, and the idea that there are silos and this is blue skies and this is applied and this is arts and this is science, I think that's kind of an irrelevance, actually.
Right. You've mentioned philanthropy a couple of times.
I'll just say one thing about that, though. The one thing that's very dangerous is we know it, right? Many of us, I think, many of the people in this room are probably successful industrialists. You'll remember, government picking winners never works. And we all know that, I think. But government continues to try and fail. So this debate can get very confused because government can tend to say things like, we want to invest taxpayers' money in areas that will generate some return. But of course, the knowledge generation generates return beyond imagination, actually. It always has. So if you I think the danger of starting to categorize and saying, well, let's just invest in something that can you know, what would be the impact of this investment if I try and measure it, and I give you that £10, then what do you think it may turn into over the next 10 years? The question is, of course, it's information free. The answers don't have any information content because we don't know. Genuinely, we don't know. There's no way that Andre and Kostya knew that doing the research they did would lead to these potentially billion or trillion dollar industrial developments. There's no way they didn't. They wouldn't have written that on a research grant because they wouldn't have known.
Thank you. Becca, you have a question.
Why do you support the University of Manchester as a donor?
Because of everything that I've said. I think, you know, I can also, I'm in a position now where I can raise money. And I think that because I'm interested in, I suppose I don't want to say, I'm interested in Britain. I like Britain. and I think that its future success and the future for everybody, not only the individuals, but the whole economic and social and intellectual success of the country, for me, is based on education all the way through. But I don't see this as sometimes you could see it as kind of a pyramid where you've got, I think government do sometimes, you've got this wide base of sort of primary and secondary education. And then somewhere at the top there's kind of an elite level, which is what we're talking about now, which you only need perhaps for a few people to do. But I see it sometimes as the other way around, in that I think that a lot of there's an aspirational aspect to being at school. When I go into schools and I talk about CERN or the Large Hadron Collider or astronomy or whatever it is, then I find a lot of children, particularly if you're in one of the school that I work with, for example, in Tower Hamlets, will say, well, it's just fascinating, but it just isn't for me. I can't see my route. I can't see how I could get there. I could never be a researcher doing a PhD at CERN. It just is not possible to imagine. And so I think that the broader and the stronger the university and higher education sector is, and the more places that are available, and the easier it is to get into those places, actually I think the more all the way through the school system, people will aspire to fill those places. The harder they'll work, the more they'll learn. I really genuinely think that's true. So I fund, in particular, I'm involved in the Manchester Access Programme because I think it's a really very, for someone in my position, it's a low-cost way of making a big impact, because the amount of money that can make a huge difference is for someone who's earning quite a lot of money is relatively small. But to that person who wants to come to university, and it might make the difference between them going to university or not, it's extremely high. So I think for me that gearing is so large that it's almost a no-brainer. It's almost obvious that, well, what do I want to do with this money? Do I want to potentially change the future prospects of, if it's only one student, it can be quite a small donation, but you can, you yourself will know that donation to you, as we said before, which it'd be a wonderful thing that you've said, that you want to be a primary school teacher. So it will change not only your life, but it will change the lives of, as we said before, 30 children every year come through, and then 30, and then 60, and then 90. I can't think of any better investment, actually, to be honest.
Our hour is just about up. Bilal, you have a very important final question for Brian now.
With how famous you've become now, have you ever been tempted to reignite your music career?
The band's waiting backstage, if you
No, I don't think so. No, I still play. I still love playing. Maybe there's, I'm just thinking actually, maybe there's one of those kind of Manchester Access Programme Live Aid single. Maybe that's the thing we should do. Everybody
Will you all
together.
promise to buy one?
Yeah, maybe.
So it's a no.
No.
That's it. Brian, any closing comments you want to make before we do one or two thank yous?
Just to say, I know, I want to thank everyone that's here, because I know everyone's here because they spend time and donate money to Manchester in one way or the other, at all levels. I know that the people at the Manchester Access Programme, the PhD scholarships, the whole thing. So I want to thank everyone here, because it genuinely makes a difference. I mean, I teach first year physicists, and I don't know what the proportion is actually. Maybe you'd actually put you on the spot. Maybe you know that there's a good fraction of them who there'll be students there when I teach them in the autumn who wouldn't be sat there if it wasn't for the Access Programme. There are people doing PhDs who wouldn't be sat there if it wasn't for the money that you kindly donate. So I think that the impact, you might not know. I didn't really know what terrific impact relatively small amounts of money, and obviously the larger the better, but even relatively small amounts of money have a huge impact on individuals and in the future on society. So I want to say thank you.
I can't tell you the proportion in physics, but it's 600 students on the MAP programme as of this year will be receiving that £1,000 scholarship.
So that's 600 students who are benefiting massively from that programme. So thank you are my comments.
Right, thank you. Well, in wrapping up, first of all, can I ask everybody to thank Brian for that fantastic overview, for the incredibly accessible, and I know that because I could understand it, insight into the science. Thanks, Brian. And can I now ask you to thank our 3 student interviewers, Nick, Becky and Bilal, who I think are ready to step into the shoes either of David Dimbleby or, who knows, Jeremy Clarkson. And Bilal, no pressure, but having done this, you had better get the grades. or we'll be asking you to come back next year to explain yourself. No, good. Very, very best of luck. Brian said his thanks to all of you as donors. And of course, the university as a whole wants to echo those thanks, but actually there's a still more important group of people who need to share their thanks. We said at the beginning, the university is all about its students. There are hundreds of students now at the university who wouldn't be here without donor generosity. Many of those students are in the audience tonight, so here's a surprise for them. Could I ask those students, please, to stand and show your appreciation to these wonderful people in the room who support you? Please, stand up, students. Thank you. And perhaps our donors would like to share their congratulations to the students for winning the scholarship and for taking their studies forward. So thank you again, everybody. We look forward to continuing the conversations downstairs where drinks are now served. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.